Committee will come to order. Welcome, Secretary Jewell, as well as other members of the Department of Interior. Good to have you with us. We are meeting this morning to review the budget request for the Department of Interior for fiscal year 2017. Secretary Jewell, welcome back to the committee. You and I have had many discussions over the years since your tenure there at Interior, and you know that I have expressed my concerns about how Interior has approached some of the issues in Alaska, as well as the rest of the nation over the past 8 years. But as you and I have discussed, we need to figure out how we can find those opportunities to work together. I think there is agreement that there are plenty of areas where it should be possible to find that agreement, but I have to be very frank with where we are this morning. When we look at the budget in front of us, it looks like, again, a rocky start to the final year of this administration. Some of the things, and I will include as part of my questions to you all this morning, but the first one that strikes me is Interior's proposal to assist Alaskans impacted by climate change through this new resiliency fund. It appears to be modeled after a provision of a bill that I wrote, the Opens Act, that our committee reported out last July. And you know, they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery, but unfortunately didn't carry my ideas all the way in terms of the pay for. You did pick up the idea, and I appreciate the President doing that. But depriving the Gulf states of revenue sharing from offshore production is just a non-starter. It would upend a deal that 71 senators supported and take money away from states that are counting on it to protect their coastlines. The effort to repeal revenue sharing is not going to go anywhere. In terms of paying for this new fund, I have suggested that a much better option is to increase domestic energy production and use those revenues to help communities in need. That would allow us to create jobs, reduce our foreign dependence, instead of simply redividing the pie. The administration also claims that this budget, quote, invests in Alaska's long-term economic and environmental well-being, close quote. But again, I've looked through this budget proposal, and what I see, unfortunately, is a continuation of the efforts that block our ability to safely develop our resources and really take away so many of the best opportunities that I think my state has to grow and prosper. One of the areas that I'm going to be asking you about this morning, Madam Secretary, is the Alaska land conveyances. We are sitting here 57 years after statehood, 45 years after passage of the Alaska Native Land Claims Settlement Act, and we are still dealing with our land conveyances, as you well know. I think it is fair to note that BLM did make some progress in 2015, but what we're seeing within this proposal is more than a 20% decrease from last year's levels. We still have about 5.3 million acres left to convey, and in our questioning, we'll have an opportunity to talk about how the methodologies are being used to provide for the surveys. But this has been something that has, again, lingered so long. And when you think about any state's ability to develop their lands, you can't do it unless you have had that title conveyed. Other areas that, again, we look at as being restrictive in terms of the federal government limiting opportunities for a state are the proposed regulations coming out of National Park Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Controversial within the state, certainly, but also nationwide, and it just seems that the department is intent on overriding state management authority over fish and game resources within their borders, inconsistent with ANILCA, but again, we'll have an opportunity to discuss that in Q&A. But it's not just Alaska. On top of all the regulations and restrictions we've seen, this budget would repeal a number of tax provisions that help maintain domestic energy production. It would impose an ambiguous new $10.25 per barrel tax on oil that will hurt families and businesses. We were out in Bethel just last week with 5 members of this committee and myself. And if you were to ask the people there in Bethel if they think that it's a smart thing to do anything that would increase the price of oil to them, they're paying about $5.65, so they're having a tough time reconciling how this could possibly be a good thing. The budget also seeks to impose new fees on energy producers and a new royalty on hard rock miners. And at a time when energy and commodity prices are low, I would expect that Interior would be looking for practical ways to make our energy and mining industries more competitive. But based on this budget, it looks like the goal is to drive them away from our federal lands and waters. With regards to the miners out in the 40-mile district, you ask them if these RMPs that they're looking at make it any easier for them to basically pursue what they have spent a lifetime trying to pursue as small operators out there. It's very tough to make that argument. And then at a time when we're recognizing that when we talk about energy insecurity, that also includes the insecurity that comes when we rely on others for our sources of minerals. And when we look at new fees and new taxes on top of already slow permitting within the industry, it does make me question, how does this help us when it comes to mineral security, which in turn leads to economic security and national security? Legacy wells. This is an issue that you and I have discussed at great length over the years. We have suggested that it is the height of double standards, that the government would be allowed to basically take a pass in terms of cleanup when the private sector would be sued until the sun sets if they had done the same thing that the federal government has done. It's an ongoing environmental insult that the government should never tolerate. And I think we recognize that the budget here is far short of what is needed. We're at $2.8 million. If I understand what it's costing us on a per well basis, it's pretty much close to $3 million a well because we've gotten beyond the easy ones, if you will. There has been a lot of news just this past week back home about the $50 million that I was able to secure through the Helium Stewardship Act, which BLM is now using to clean up about 40% of the legacy wells, which I think you and I would agree gets us on that track, but making sure that we are on a path after that is, I think, critically important, particularly recognizing that we're looking at perhaps 29 more wells to be cleaned up. So if you estimate maybe $2 to $3 million per well, do the math, and we're going to be sitting here for a long time cleaning this up. And of course, beyond energy, there's King Cove. It was 26 months ago today that you rejected the life-saving road for this remote community. And at that time, you promised that you were going to find some way to help the local residents, but I don't see anything in this request to protect those people whose lives remain in needless danger. More broadly, the administration continues to ignore budget realities and propose billions in mandatory spending, including for proposals that have been rejected in the past for very valid reasons. We've had a lot of consensus in this committee about support for Land and Water Conservation Fund. We've actually moved through this measure as part of our energy bill, a provision that would address some reforms but you are advancing full funding for Lwcf without any offset and without reforms. I think this, again, we'll have an opportunity to speak more to this in question and answer, but when we recognize the substantial backlog that we have within the federal agencies, National Park Service at close to $12 billion in back loan, it kind of begs the question why are we pushing to acquire more land when it's obvious that we have a great need, a great demand to care for the lands that we have. Now, having said all that, I think that there are some important issues where I hope that we would be able to forge this common ground despite the budget proposals that we have here. We talk a lot about wildfire and the problem that we face in terms of budgeting and actual forest management. I noted that in news yesterday in Alaska, we have our first wildfire out in BLM area outside of Delta. Now, it's been contained, but it's a reminder that the season is coming a lot earlier. We just don't have the snow cover that we would hope up there. Our committee is going to dedicate much of March to finding a solution to the challenges of budgeting and forest management. And then a second area where I think collaboration is possible is the National Park Service Centennial. I know that this is a priority of yours. I have said that the administration's proposal is unrealistic at $1.5 billion in mandatory spending, but I do think that this is an opportunity for us to put the Park Service on a long-term path towards viability with its 100th birthday here. So this is an opportunity for us to figure out how we can work through the maintenance backlog so that we've got a park system that we can all be proud of. That would be a legacy for us all. With that, Madam Secretary, again, thank you for being here before us this morning, and we will look forward to your comments and that of your colleagues as well.